Hello, everyone. Uh, Today we're continuing our studies of the Communist Manifesto. Now, for the past couple of live streams, we've been through first two parts. The first one, bourgeois and proletariat, which is uh, more or less on historical side when the authors they discuss how bourgeois and proletarians came to be, uh, discussed some of historical changes that occurred over the years, and the second part was communists and proletarians, and this is to my understanding at this point that the second part was the core part. This is where the most of their, let's say, demands and yes, the most of their demands lie. And the famous 10 uh, requirements of the Communist Manifesto they lie exactly in the second chapter. Now, we have two more chapters left. It's actually not so big. And we have at our hands at the moment Socialist and Communist Literature, and obviously the commentaries of authors of Communist Manifesto on that. So let's dive into that. Socialist and Communist Literature. Reactionary Socialism. A. Feudal Socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1930 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political struggle was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible. But even in the domain of literature, the old crisis of Restoration period has become impossible. We have two notations here that by Restoration they mean not the English Restoration of 1660s to 1689, but the French Restoration of 1814 to 1830, not by Engels himself to the English edition of 1988. And about agitation, this applies chiefly to Germany, where the landed aristocracy and squirearchy have large portions of their estates cultivated for their own account by stewards, and are moreover extensive beetroot sugar manufacturers and distillers of potato spirits. The wealthier British aristocracy are, as yet, rather above that, but they too know how to make up for declining rents by lending their names to floaters or more or less shady shady joint stock companies. Again, not by Engels to the English edition of 1888. So, back to the whole text. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy was obliged to lose sight, apparently, of its own interests, and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by signing lampoons on their new masters and whispering in their ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. Uh, just to be totally clear, I'm gonna need to check what's lampoons mean. Lampoon. Publicly criticize someone or something by using ridicule, irony, or sarcasm. A speech or text lampooning someone or something. Okay. by signing lampoons on their new masters, meaning ridiculing them, signing documents that ridicule their new masters, and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. And by his, of course, they mean working class. In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half an echo of the past, half menace of the future, at times by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effects, through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian arms back in front of the banner, in front for a banner. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coats of arms, and deserted with loud and irrelevant laughter. One section of the French legitimists and young Englands exhibited this spectacle. Okay, so they are kind of making fun of the feudal socialism. Of course, this movement seems like it's no longer there, because this is the first time I hear of that. One section of the French legitimists and young England exhibited the spectacle. What exactly do they mean by that? In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forget that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different and that are now antiquated. In showing that, under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed, they forget that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal to the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeois amount to this: that under the bourgeois regime, a class is being developed which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. Okay, so mhm. When they talk about reactionary character, it means that as I understand this, they mean it's backward character. And the return to the previous mode of being, previous mode of exploitation, even though it means like it it looks a lot more favorable than being exploited by bourgeoisie, they kind of forgot that bourgeoisie existence is inevitable in the society ruled by the feudalists, meaning that at some point, even they are going to be totally abolished, bourgeoisie, I mean, at some point they are going to have their return, right? And again, they are going to, the history will repeat itself. Yes. I'm gonna need to check on that word. Find fault with someone. Scold. Okay. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. Okay. So they are against the revolution. Uh, More or less moderate policy. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class. And in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stood to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. Okay, sorry, there was a mistake on my part when I read the last note. I actually thought that it's about English agitation here, but this is actually we're referring to these potato spirits. Okay, so going back to the text here. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. And again, I need to check the meaning of this word. Parson, a beneficed member of the clergy, a rector or vicar, any member of the clergy, especially a Protestant one. So, as parson has ever gone hand in hand with landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a social tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of this charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burning of the aristocrats. B. Okay, so this is this part on feudal socialism is more or less as they use this word, and I'm there to quote that, a lampoon itself to this type of socialism, as they see it as backwards, and as I understand, they see this feudal socialism as something that is bound to repeat the history, even if it succeeded. At some point, the bourgeoisie will make their return, and everything has to, uh, well, the world has to go through that issue again, according to authors. Now we are going to be part petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not the only class whose conditions of existence pined and perished in the atmosphere of modern bourgeois society. The medieval bourgeois and the small peasant proprietors were the persecutors for the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed, industrially and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie, and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition, and as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced in manufacturers, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. Mhm. So by petty bourgeois, they mean actually very very small bourgeois like people. Okay. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half of the population, it was natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use, in their criticism of the bourgeois regime, the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeois. And from the standpoint of these intermediate classes, should take up the cudgels for the working class. I'm gonna need to check this word, obviously.
Cudgel.
Cudgel. Oops. A short, thick stick used as a weapon. Should take out the cudgels from for the working class. Is it more than half? It was natural that writers who sided with proletariats should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of this school, not only in France, but also in England. This school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradiction in the conditions of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologists of economists. It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labor, the concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction and crisis. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasants, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequality in the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, the dissolution of old moral bonds, of the old family relations, of the old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and of exchange, and with them the old property relations and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange within the framework of the old property relations that have been, and were bound to be, exploded by those means. In either case, it is both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are corporate guilds for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. Ultimately, when stubborn historical facts had dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception, this form of socialism ended in a miserable fit of the blues. So it looks like they give some due to the petty bourgeois socialism, that they actually see the situation as authors also see, with all the tragedy and inevitabilities, right? But however, it aspires to restore the old world's rule instead of going forward. And by forward, of course, they primarily focus on abolishing private property, which those petty bourgeois socialism authors think that it's not necessary. Okay. And we have C, German or true socialism. The Socialists and Communist Literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of the bourgeoisie in power, and that was the expression of the struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers, would-be philosophers, and d'esprit, men of letters, eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, this French literature lost all its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, to the German philosopher of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified, in their eyes, the law of pure will, of will as it was bound to be of true human will generally. Sorry, I read it wrong. Uh, and the utterance of the will of revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified, in their eyes, the loss of pure will, of will as it was bound to be, of true human will generally. Okay. The work of the German literati consisted solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lies of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticism, they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of the truth. Not the interests of the proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. Uh-huh. So now I get the point. This is obviously the true socialism taken into the quote marks that they do not actually, the authors do not consider this type of German socialism to be actually true, right? They mock it for being too abstract, too general, and lacking uh, any practical use. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly, and extolled its poor stock on trade in such a mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. The fight of the Germans, and especially of the Prussian bourgeoisie, against feudal aristocracy and absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement, became more earnest. By this, the long wished for the opportunity was offered to true socialism of confronting the political movement with the socialist demands, of hurling the traditional anathemas against liberalism, against representative government, against bourgeois competition, bourgeois freedom of the press, bourgeois legislation, bourgeois liberty and equality, of the preaching to the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by this bourgeois movement. German socialism forgot, in the nick of the time, that the French criticism, whose silly echo it was, presupposed the existence of the modern bourgeois society, with its corresponding economic conditions of existence. and the political constitution adapted thereto, the very things thus attainment was the object of the pending struggle in Germany. Okay, so they went sort of ahead of the time for their own country. To the absolute governments, with their following of parsons, professors, country squires, and officials, it served as a welcome scarecrow against the threatening bourgeoisie. It was a sweet finish after the bitter pills of floggings and bullets, with which the same governments, just at that time, those of the German working classes rising. While this true socialism thus serves the government as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it at the same time directly represented a reactionary interests, the interest of German Philistines. In Germany, the petty bourgeois class, a relic of the 16th century and since then constantly cropping up again under the various forms, is the real social basis of the existing state of things. Mhm. So this German type of socialism is mocked here as the socialism on the side of the current government, which is not against bourgeoisie because it's for the working class, but rather it's against the bourgeoisie as it is for the current state of affairs with the feudal or maybe some sort of post-feudal but not yet bourgeoisie type of society, while at the same time pretending to be for the working class. Okay. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial and political supremacy of the bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction. On the one hand, from the concentration of capital, on the other, from the rise of revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. The rope of speculative cobwebs. Sorry, I'm gonna need to look this. Spider's web, especially when old and dusty. This rope of speculative cobwebs, embroidered with flowers of rhetoric, steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment, this transcendental rope in which the German socialists wrapped their sorry eternal truth, all skin and bone, served to wonderfully increase the sale of their goods among such a public. All skin and bone served to wonderfully increase the sale of their goods among such a public. So they actually accusing authors of German socialism to that they just create product to be sold, and that is and the eternal truth here is used mockingly because obviously authors do not believe that German socialists actually have those eternal truths, or even if they matter at that point. And on its part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling as a bombastic representative of the petty bourgeois Philistine. It proclaimed the German nation to be the model nation, and the German petty Philistine to be the typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model man, it gave a hidden, higher, socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of its real character. It went to the extreme lengths of directly opposing the brutally destructive tendency of communism and of proclaiming its supreme and impartial contempt of all class struggles. With very few exceptions, all the so called socialists and communist publications that now at the time of the writing, 1947, circulate in Germany, belong to the domain of this foul and enervating literature. Okay, so this was a part on reactionary socialism, feudal socialism, which were aimed to restore things as they were before the bourgeoisie came to be, meaning to restore it to the feudal mode of being, mode of production, and of, let's use the author's terminology, mode of exploitation, which obviously has to, obviously to the authors, if they take power, they will be forced to step on the same mines to repeat the history with inevitable reappearance of bourgeoisie, and thus the existing at the time of this of writing of this document, existing class struggle. Okay, petty bourgeois socialism is actually the socialism that received the least amount of mockery here, as it is was they were acknowledged that they saw some of the tragedy of the world in which they lived. This is actually a very interesting phrase when they actually list all those things that they consider to be wrong at the moment. But they also are sort of in the way of returning to the things as they were. And they claim it to be reactionary, obviously, as this whole part of this chapter called reactionary socialism and utopian. So this is considered to be self-deception. This form of socialism ended in a miserable fit of the blues. Okay, and the most mocked socialism is German socialism, which was taken out of the context from the French socialism, French literature, French social literature, socialistic literature, and authors mock it for the extreme abstraction and extreme lack of practicality, as if they actually lost all the connection to the reality in which all the processes are actually and how they are acting up. And the last accusation was that this German socialism is more like it accuses and tries to attack bourgeoisie, but not because of their I'm hesitant to say the word love, but oh well. Not because of their love of the bourgeoisie, sorry, not because of their love of the proletarians, but rather because of their fear for the bourgeoisie, as those German socialists actually are pro current government, right? So those pamphlets are rather about the current preserving current things than moving forward. So those are the accusations to this type of socialism. So all of those were actually to aimed to return to some sort of the previous state of, or as they call, mode of being, production, exploitation, and whatnot. Now we're coming to the second part of this chapter, conservative or bourgeois socialism. And let's address that. A part of the bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of the bourgeois society. To this section belong economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of the working class, organizers of charity, members of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, temperance fanatics, hole and corner reformers of every imaginable kind. This form of socialism has, moreover, been worked out into complete systems. We may cite Proudhon's philosophy de la misérie as an example of this form. The socialist bourgeois want all the advantages of the modern social conditions without the struggles and dangers necessarily resulting therefrom. They desire the existing state of society minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for a bourgeoisie without a proletariat. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be the best, and bourgeois socialism develops this comfortable conception into various more or less complete systems. In requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system and thereby to march straight forward into the New Jerusalem, it but requires in reality that the proletariat should remain within the bounds of existing society, but should cast away all the hateful ideas concerning the bourgeoisie. A second and more practical but less systematic form of this socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of the working class by showing that no mere political reform, but only a change in the material conditions of the existence in economical relations could be of any advantage to them. By changes in the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeois relations of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution, but administrative reforms based on the continued existence of these relations, reforms therefore that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor, but at the best lessen the cost and simplify the administrative work of the bourgeoisie government. I'm gonna need to reread this again. By changes in the material conditions of the existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeois relation of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution, but administrative reforms based on the continued existence of these relations, reforms therefore that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor, but at best lessen the cost and simplify the administrative work of bourgeois government. So the main issue here is with the lack of effectiveness of this form of socialism. So the idea is to strip working class of its ideas of a revolution and sort of accept the current mode of being, discourage its revolutionary ideas, and instead went with the administrative reformational way, right? And authors believe that this is at least not efficient enough. Bourgeois socialism attains adequate expression when, and only when, it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade. For the benefit of the working class. Protective duties. For the benefit of the working class. prison reform for the benefit of the working class. This is the last word and the only seriously meant word of the bourgeois socialism. It is summed up with the phrase, the bourgeois is a bourgeois for the benefit of the working class. Okay, so they actually do not believe that anything bourgeois socialism claim, as they see bourgeois socialism as another form of justification for the bourgeoisie. Okay, granted. This actually sounds like it makes sense. Okay. And we have last part of this chapter, critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not here refer to that literature which, in every great modern revolution, has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writings of Babeuf and others. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in times of universal excitement when feudal society was being overthrown, necessarily failed, owing to the then undeveloped state of the proletariat, as well as to the absence of the economic conditions for its emancipation, conditions that had yet to be produced and could be produced by the impending bourgeois epoch alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied these first movements of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism and social leveling in its crudest form. Inculcated. I'm gonna need to look up this word. Inculcate. Instill. By persistent instruction. Teach someone an attitude, idea, or habit by persistent instruction. Okay, so the whole idea here is the first direct attempt of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in times of universal excitement, when feudal society was being overthrown, necessarily failed, owing to the then undeveloped state of the proletariat. As well as to the absence of the economic conditions for its emancipation. Conditions that had yet to be produced and could be produced by the impending bourgeois epoch alone. So, proletariat existed in some way at the moment of the feudal society end, but proletariat was not yet strong enough to attain tolerable or even good existence, because as I see logic behind those words, authors believe that proletariat attains its ends only by getting to the point when they have nothing to lose and everybody is more or less united to overthrow bourgeoisie. And such conditions were not yet there, because the existence of the proletarians were at the moment tolerable, and therefore they had something to lose and not willing to be as revolutionary as at the time of writing this document, I guess. Okay, the revolutionary literature that accompanied those first movements of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. Okay, It inculcated universal asceticism and social leveling in its crudest form. So they insisted on universal asceticism. The socialists and communist systems, properly so called, those of Saint-Simon, Fourier, Owen, and others, spring into existence in the early undeveloped period, described above, of the struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. See section 1, Bourgeois and Proletarians. I actually do not remember anything about the undeveloped period being told in the bourgeois and proletarians. Luckily I have some notes with me. Market expansion allowed for rapid development of a feudal society, for example, in navigation, blah blah blah. The labor has to be divided not by production, but At the time of market expansion, the bourgeoisie increased their capital and became the most prominent class in society. Free trade, which is free, constantly revolutionizing vast uncertainty, agitation distinguishes the bourgeoisie epoch for all earlier ones. Ever changing environment, I remember that. Through bourgeoisie power, they changed the production and consumption. Cosmopolitan character. Well, I guess they mean that the whole chapter probably is dedicated to the struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. Okay. So, the founders of these systems see indeed the class antagonisms, as well as the actions of the decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society. But the proletariat, as yet in its infancy, offers to them the spectacle of a class without any historical initiative or any independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonisms keeps even pace with the development of industry, the economic situation, as they find it, does not as yet offer to them the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore search after a new social science, after new social laws that are to create these conditions. Historical action is to yield to their personal inventive action. Historically created conditions of emancipation to fantastic ones. And the gradual, spontaneous class organization of the proletariat to an organization of society, especially contrived by these inventors. Future history resolves itself in their eyes into the propaganda and the practical carrying out of their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of caring chiefly for the interests of the working class, as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. So, it seems like their critique of the critical utopian socialism is that they remember about working class only when the working class is the most suffering one, right? Well, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, But it looks like this is one of the appropriate ways of thinking of society, right? To focus on the most miserable part of it, fix it in a sense, and when the situation for this part of society has been improved, move to the next lowest point, right? It's one of appropriate states to my understanding of this. But okay, let's move on. The undeveloped states the undeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, causes socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the condition of every member of society, even that of the most favored. Hence, they habitually appeal to the society at large, without the distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. For how can people, when once they understand their system, fail to see in it the best possible plan of the best possible state of society? Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example to pave the way for the new social gospel. Such fantastic pictures of future society, painted at a time when the proletariat is still in a very undeveloped state and has but a fantastic conception of its own position, correspond with the first instinctive yearnings of that class for a general reconstruction of society. But these socialist and communist publications contain also a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are full of the most valuable materials for the enlightenment of the working class. The practical measures proposed in them, such as the abolition of the distinction between town and country, of the family, of the carrying on of industries for the account of private individuals, and of the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the function of the state into a mere superintendence of production. All these proposals point solely to the disappearance of class antagonisms, which were at the time only just cropping up, and which in these publications are recognized in their earliest indistinct and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of purely utopian character. Okay, so it looks like authors here approve some notion of critical utopian socialism, but they criticize it for being they approve how critical utopian socialists see the required measures, but since this movement was developed at a time where the development of bourgeoisie and proletariat themselves only just began, they failed to see the bigger picture, right? And these are the main issues that authors have with critical utopian socialists. The significance of the critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development. This proportion, as the modern class struggle develops and takes definite shape, this fantastic standing apart from the contest, these fantastic attacks on it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, although the originators of these systems were in many respects revolutionary, their disciples have in every case formed mere reactionary sects. They hold fast by the original views of the masters, in opposition to the progressive historical development of the proletariat. They therefore endeavor, and that consistently, to deaden the class struggle and to reconcile the class antagonism. Deaden. What does it mean?
Deaden.
Deaden. Sorry. Make a noise or sensation less strong or intense. Deprive the power of cessation. Aha. So it does mean has something to do with the word detonate. Okay. They deaden this class struggle and to reconcile the class antagonism. They still dream of experimental realization of their social utopians, of founding isolated phalansters. What does that mean? Type of building designed to self-contained utopian community? Okay. Of founding isolated utopian communities, of establishing home colonies, or setting up a little Icaria. Duodecimo editions of the New Jerusalem. And to realize all these castles in the air, they are compelled to appeal to the feelings and purses of the bourgeois. By degrees, they sink into the category of the reactionary or conservative socialists depicted above, differing from this only by more systematic pedantry and by their fanatical and superstitious belief in the miraculous effects of their social science. They therefore violently oppose all political action on the part of the working class. Such action, according to them, can only result from blind unbelief in the new gospel. The Owenites in England and the Fourierists in France, respectively, oppose the Chartists and the Reformists. Okay, so we have here some clarification notes. Phalansters were socialist colonies on the plan of Charles Fourier. Icaria was the name given by Kepler to his utopia and later on to his American communist colony. Home colonies were what Owen called his communist model societies. Phalansters was the name of the public palaces planned by Fourier. Icaria was the name given to the utopian land of fancy whose communist institutions Kepler portrayed. Okay, so we went through the whole third chapter called Socialists and Communist Literature. In this chapter, authors went through a great deal of critique for their, let's say, colleagues, because socialists with communists are going, in my opinion and my understanding, hand in hand. So they critiqued it. Some of them very harshly. Some of them they were more or less merciful. And of course, this to conclude this chapter, they divided it in three parts. Reactionary socialism, which is, as you might understand by the name, is dedicated to reactionary movements within socialist movements, meaning that they want to not move forward to, as authors felt, to the better future, but back to the past when things were at least partially better. So that is reactionary socialism. They have conservative or bourgeois socialism, which is claimed, which is concluded with words that in an end it's fraud. A bourgeois for is a bourgeois, right? And everything goes uh, within such literature as if it's all for the benefit of the working class. So it actually have um, more or less they have acknowledged more or less the understanding of this. Oh, sorry, no. I actually mistook it for the for petty bourgeois socialism. This is conservative or bourgeois socialism. So those are about to remain everything the way it is right now, but more or less to get rid of the most destructive elements of the current bourgeois mode of production and exploitation. And critical utopian socialists, which were not so much criticized here, they understood that the conditions for those pieces of literature of the uh, critical utopian socialism were written at the time of only the development of bourgeoisie and proletarians, when not that everything was clear at the moment how things are going to be, and therefore they actually didn't see the whole picture yet. They predicted the same or more or less the overlap with the uh, demands in the Communist Manifesto itself. The overlaps were quite significant, but as authors also uh, claim, this is more or less utopian. So they do not believe that uh, the way things are described by those people are actually going to be uh, in reality. So once again, I am going to say that I am absolutely not in the favor of rushing through the text, even though we have not so much left, only one page of it. Its position of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. And this is going to be the last part of the Communist Manifesto. Everything that left after that are letters from Engels and, well, actually, without anything, let's just review it a little bit here. Some prefaces. I am not actually sure that it is required to study through those prefaces at the moment, while it might provide some understanding in the future. Well, we'll see about that. So right now we might congratulate ourselves with finishing the third part of the communist of sorry congratulate ourselves with finishing the third chapter of the Communist Manifesto. Our next step, which is going to be probably tomorrow, is that we will go through a position of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition and parties, probably review the whole thing altogether. And then we will have at our disposal some additional notes, introductions, prefaces, and something else. And I guess I'll see you next time then. Well, thank you for watching, and bye bye.